Welcome back to this week's edition of the AGV44 Podcasts. With this week's Parshas Terumah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Klal Yisrael to build him a house, to build him a sanctuary, to build him a temple, a place where Hashem could come dwell amongst us common folk down below. Please, if you have any questions, emails, ha'aros, shailas, tshuvas, please send me an email at michaelburke97@gmail.com. And because of Hashem's commandment to build the Beis HaMikdash, Klal Yisrael is now osek. They are now orangutan. They are now involved with trying to raise the funds to build the Beis HaMikdash. Now, I would like to preface this vart by saying there are two types of people in the world. There are those that would hibernate, take a break, retreat from the parashios that having to do with Terumah, Titzav, Vayaka, Bakude. All of the laws that seem like they are architectural blueprints that seem a little bit less interesting or exciting on the outside. Vayikra deals with karbanos, the offerings. Also, perhaps a person could say, too hard, not for me. There's a second type of person. A person who looks to absorb. A person who looks to detect new information. A person who looks to unearth deep ideas from these parashios, to learn up that the Aron had a gold on the outside, wood in the middle, and gold on the inside. Learning up different halachos about how a Talmud Chacham, how a person should live, to be gold on the outside, but be gold on the inside. That the staves of the Aron should never leave, to always be prepared. Different vartlach ideas that we can learn out from the Mishkan. I hope, and it's a bracha, that everyone, all the podcast family, should be part of the second group, that we should look to unearth and detect new vartlach each and every day of these parshios. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, back at the ranch, commands us that we should go and build him a house. I'd like to pose a question. When we're building HaKadosh Baruch Hu's house, the direct measurements are given to us by Moshe that we should build the Aron. There should be an exact cubit feet to 3.5 by 2.5 by 1.5. You can look inside of the Torah to find all the different measurements. We are commanded to build it with certain types of wood and certain types of gold, silver, all these different things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the exact dimensions and the exact blueprint of how his house should look. Here's the question, we would like to add a little bit more towards the Aron. Let's make it 3 amos as opposed to 2.5 amos. Make it a little bit nicer. Hashem's silver is very nice by some of the other structures, but let's make it all gold. Or let's add a little sapphire in there. Let's add something else fancy and put it inside of the Aron. Let's add diamonds. Would that be considered the Mishkan? Can we beautify it? Or can we say, Hashem, 3 amos is nice, but we're a little bit short on funds. Why don't we just cut it back an inch here? Zokt Posuk Tez Zokt verse 9. Kechol asher ani ma'are oisoch es tavnis ba'mishkan ve'es tavnis kol kelo v'chein ta'asu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us strict, exact dimensions of how his house should look. After all, Hashem knows how to design a house. He has designed the entire world. I would like to develop this idea that the Mishkan had exact dimensions, and us adding or taking away from the dimensions that God has instructed us makes it not a Mishkan. 1 inch larger on the Aron would make it not a Mishkan, not inhabitable by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God himself. If we want to add more than one or more than the allotted amount of spigots or spouts to the kior, because we want more people to be able to wash their hands, that is not a Mishkan. Hashem gave us how HaKadosh Baruch Hu can live in this world. The Alshich HaKadosh and the Nefesh HaChaim, Reb Chaim Volozhin, both, amongst others, to tell us on the famous pasuk of Asu li mikdash v'shalchanti b'soicham. What happens when we don't have a mikdash? What happens when we don't have a mishkan? Hashem dwells amongst us, in our hearts, in our minds. It does not say, the pasuk does not tell us b'sochechem. It tells us b'socham, in us. We each have Hashem in us. I'd like to develop and conjure the idea of we also need to make ourselves and build ourselves as proper mikdash ma'at, as a proper mishkan. The first point I'd like to talk about is that the way that we build in this world is different than the way that we build in the Ruchnius world, in the spiritual world. If you're going to build a house, you obviously build the shelter, you build the roof, you build the ceiling, you build the walls, and then you bring in the furniture. It's interesting, if you look inside this week's Parsha, you'll find that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to build the Aron, to build the Menorah, to build the Mizbeach, to bring the furniture in before there was even walls, before there was even a structure. Very odd, don't you think? A second thing, when we're raising money, it wasn't just an effort to raise money that anyone who you could get money from, to build the yeshiva as they do. We raise money. We're willing to accept all donations for the sake of Torah. It wasn't like that. You had to be a nediv leiv. You had to be someone who was giving somebody who wanted to. They were fighting to be the people who were giving the donations to the Mishkan. Raising funds was different. The way they built the house was different. The way that we build in the Ruchnius world is different than the way that we build in the Gashmiistic world. You're building a warehouse, you build the outsides, then you build the insides. You're building a house, you build the outsides, then you build the insides. The way that you build in the Ruchnius world is oftentimes different. We need to remember this. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu informed, instructed, he delineated the exact ways for us to grow, for us to climb, as to build ourselves into proper Mikdash Ma'atz. If we would like to say, I'm going to go ahead and take the necessary steps to become a Talmid Chacham, to become a tzaddik, to become a tzaddikas, well, if we just make our own path, we're forsaking the path that Hashem gave us. We're forsaking the trusted, true, and tried way by the one who created the ultimate success and created the path. The Memches Kinyane Torah, the 48 ways to acquire wisdom, the Torah, the Mishnah tells us, Kinyan, it is an acquisition. The way to acquire it with strict dinim is with kinyanim, is with an acquisition. Some of them, if you look inside, aren't exactly even directly connected to Torah. Aren't exactly directly connected to, or it's hard for us to make out how it could lead us to be better people. But the Torah was created and given by God, and Hashem has instructed us the proper way to do it. We must trust the process, is my first point I want to make. We must follow the instructions Hashem has given us. We don't need to trailblaze. You struggle with desire, lust, Torah. Torah tells us openly, learn more Torah. A mind that's filled with wisdom doesn't dwell on such lowly things. A person has struggles with sadness, anxiety, so you work on your emunah and bitachon, trust in God, to realize it's all from Hashem and all for the good. Work more and more to grow to higher levels. That's the first point, to trust the process. To build the way we build in the Ruchnius world, to build it properly, and not to build it the wrong way that we do in the Gashmias world, in the physical world. The second point I want to make is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that he'll rest his Shechina in the Mikdash, on a vessel, on an item that's properly prepared for the holiness. We had to build the Mishkan exactly right, kechut hasayir, not a hair's breadth different than how God commanded us, and only then will Hashem rest his Shechina on us. Back to this Al-Shech and back to this Nefesh HaChaim. If we want to create for ourselves proper Mikdash Ma'at, proper dwelling places for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which we all want, we need to properly groom, properly ready ourselves to be a Kli Kebel, an accepting vessel, a prepared Kli for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to dwell in us. The Rambam brings that a Navi who wanted to experience prophecy, he was not able to through Torah, not able to through Tefillah. It was specifically through Simcha Shal Mitzvah. Happiness of doing mitzvahs. Simcha. In order to reach the level that Hashem rests his Shechina on us, we need to build it and properly prepare it the way that God intended. The second point I want to make here is that we need to ready ourselves to be prepared fully in all aspects to be a proper vessel for Hashem to rest his Shechina. We can't overlook and say, I'm a Torah scholar, and I daven, and I have midas, but I'm just not a humble person. Or, even more so, like Reb Chaim Vital tells us, that you can do all the Torah you want. You can study all the Torah you want. But unless you have done the prerequisite for Torah, unless you have perfected your midos, you are not a proper Klei Kebel. You are not a properly prepared vessel that Hashem will rest his Shechina on. We see these two ideas here, that building the Mishkan, we need to build it the way that Hashem instructed us to. Trust the process. And to paraphrase a famous line, perhaps this line will be lost on some of us, which is not the worst thing in the world. But if you will build it, he will come. To build our field of dreams, we must build it properly. The proper steps that HaKadosh Baruch Hu set out for us. To build it the way that we build in the Ruchnius world. And to build it the way that God has instructed us to build it. To not add or detract from any of the details or any of the instructions that Hashem has told us. A Moiridik Shabbos.